There are nights in Port Charles when the city seems to hold its breath, and this was one of them, the hush before a storm born not of weather but of secrets, family, and the hard metallic click of decisions that cannot be unmade, because when Carly Spencer finally understood what Jason Morgan had tried to shield her from, that her daughter Jocelyn had been recruited into the murky machinery of the WSB by the man who'd set himself up as protector and partner, she did not splinter, she focused. The way glass focuses sunlight to flame, into a single purpose that made everything else, old grudges, recent truces, the polite fictions of civility, fall away like ash, and from the moment Jason's words broke the surface, "Joss is in, Brennan did it," he lied, Carly began composing a response that wasn't a scream or a plea but a campaign, a sequence of maneuvers that would take her directly into the heart of the one place where hatred and usefulness converged, a cell in Steinmauer where Valentine Cassadine, brilliant, unrepentant, and recently caged, had good reason to hold Jack Brennan's name like poison on his tongue, because when a mother realizes a man has put her child on a path where the mission briefing can become an obituary, the calculus changes, and Carly, who knows every scuffed tile and fault line of this town, saw clearly that the shortest route to dismantling the threat was through an alliance everyone else would call unthinkable, until it worked. She tried the direct route first, because she is still, even now, a believer in the power of confrontation to peel the varnish from a liar. In Brennan's living room, eyes steady, voice measured, she offered him a lifeline disguised as a warning, as if to say I will not burn this down if you put out the fuse with your own hands, and he responded with elegance and deflection, a connoisseur of half-truths who understood that confidence is 90% of any performance. He promised the thing a scorpion promises before it stings, and walked out into the night certain he'd left the conversation intact, never understanding that the ground had already moved beneath him. Because as the door clicked shut behind him, Carly did what she does when grief wants to become rage, she weaponized time, she called Damian Spinelli, patron saint of rolling back doors and paper identities, and asked for the kind of kit that lets you cross thresholds legally meant to remain closed, new name, new history, new passport, something that would slip past a virtual courtroom scanners and a federal penitentiary's front desk, and because Spinelli knows the rhythm of her voice when she is past doubt, he did not ask if this was wise, he asked how fast. The decision to seek Valentine was not sentimental and it wasn't reckless, it was arithmetic. Brennan had put Valentine in a cage, and men in cages think long and carefully about leverage. Valentine had already played chess with Brennan's life once, spiking a bottle meant for celebration, an act that almost cost Carly her own heartbeat, and in that near tragedy lay the cruel paradox that made her choice both galling and obvious. The man who had nearly killed her by trying to kill Brennan now had the motive and the imagination to help her make Brennan answer for what he'd done to Joss. So Carly studied the footage everyone had studied, that quick shot from the fall promo of a brunette stepping toward a glass door and a pair of watchful guards, and she took the hint and bent it to her will, a wig the color of midnight, a posture altered by purpose, the new identity that could pass muster when a judge's avatar demanded proof of existence. She would not come to Steinmauer as Carly Spencer, mother and businesswoman and eternal lightning rod, she would come as a problem to be solved. And she would offer Valentine a solution with edges sharp enough to cut both ways. It is one thing to pick a lock and another to sit across from a Cassadine whose mind is a map with whole countries erased and redrawn in the time it takes a guard to clear his throat. Valentine's eyes, when the glass partition's phone crackled to life, were not the eyes of a supplicant. They were the eyes of a mathematician presented with an unsolved proof, and if Carly was the variable, Brennan was the constant, the man who pushed Valentine into a corner, the man who treated Carly's child as a deployable asset, the man who believed, fatally, that two people with cause would never find a way to turn cause into collaboration. Carly did not flatter, she did not apologize for surviving his last miscalculation. She built a case with the cool fury of someone who knows exactly what line was crossed. You want out, you want him broken, I want my daughter safe and the ledger balanced. I will convert what I have, access, cover, a city full of favors, into the parts of a machine we can both operate, and when it runs, it will grind Brennan into the dust of his own schemes. Valentine, who at his most dangerous is never theatrical, did not smile. He asked the questions the way a surgeon asks for instruments. What do you know? Who else knows it? Where is Brennan exposed? How many doors can you open without tripping alarms? How far will you go? And Carly's answers, precise and unsentimental, moved the conversation from possibility to contingency. Spinelli's papers would pass a hearing to give her a legal foothold within a system Brennan thinks he owns, the WSB's. Internal redundancies, those sign-offs, those tracking codes, could be inverted, not to crash the system but to reroute its assumptions, making Brennan's authorization trail look like a trap he walked into alone. And while the city slept, she would keep the performance going, the smile at dinner, the forgiving text, the choreography of normalcy that lets a predator keep his back turned, never guessing the room behind him is filling with allies he cannot see. The plan that began to take shape across that scarred metal deck was not simply revenge. Revenge is primal, and this required something colder, neutralization, exposure, the bureaucratic death that men like Brennan fear more than bullets. Valentine offered the skeletal structure, how to trigger an audit without appearing to trigger it, which rival faction would pounce if a certain memo leaked, which judge harbored a quiet contempt for Brennan's shortcuts. Carly offered the arteries and nerves, how to stage a near miss that looked like Brennan's negligence, how to funnel a sliver of truth to precisely the right set of ears in exactly the right sequence to keep him turning in circles, and for every step forward she added a fallback, because she understands that men like Brennan, cornered, do not surrender, they escalate. She would have to keep Joss safe without tightening the grip around her. That meant a conversation as delicate as an extraction, one that refused to infantilize a young woman who had already walked into fire and walked back out. Carly would not forbid, because forbidding breeds defiance and secrecy is Brennan's oxygen. Instead she would strip him of that oxygen by making Joss an informed actor in her own defense, a partner in the quiet counterintelligence of shutting doors he thought were open. The grilling the town expected, a mother's incandescent rage, would present as discipline, but underneath it would be strategy. What did he ask? What did you promise? What did you sign? Who else was in the room? What does the directive actually say? And while the questions built a dossier, the love would remain visible. So that when Brennan tested for fractures, he would find none. It is impossible to talk about Carly without talking about the way she learns while moving. She does not freeze and acquire wisdom in the stillness, she acquires it at speed, mid-turn, and so even as she maintained the illusion that Brennan's hold on her life and body and house remained unbroken, she adjusted, turning his habits into tells, the hour he prefers to call from, the words he uses when he is hiding a timeline, the colleagues he never names, the promises he makes too quickly and the ones he never makes at all. Each pattern, annotated, became a handle Valentine could seize in the dark. And if there was a bitter irony in the fact that the man who almost killed her would now become the instrument of her daughter's safety, Carly accepted it without ceremony, because motherhood is not a priesthood of purity, it is a series of choices in imperfect rooms with imperfect allies, and the only moral measure that matters is whether the child walks out. The town will debate the ethics, Jason's protectiveness set against Carly's audacity, the risk of turning a Cassadine into a co-author of justice. But the town does not sit up at 3 a.m. with the knowledge that an agency can call and send your daughter into a hallway where the floor plan is unknown. Carly does, and it is that sleeplessness that hardens into resolve, into a willingness to build a coalition out of inconvenient parts. What waits ahead for Brennan is not cinematic calamity but something worse for a man in love with control, a descent into administrative gravity, his allies peeling off not because they fear prison but because they fear paperwork. The anonymous complaint that triggers oversight, the sudden silence of a fund that always paid out on Fridays, the judge who won't take the call, the op he thought was greenlit that arrives at the staging area with no fuel and no air support. He will look for the saboteur and find no single pair of hands to cuff, because the saboteur is the design of the board now, and design is what Carly and Valentine constructed across a telephone and a sheet of glass. Plotting a future where Brennan learns that the punishment for turning a daughter into an asset is to discover that a mother can turn a whole city into a net. If there is tragedy braided into the logic, it's the knowledge that trust, once spent, cannot be repurchased with contrition. Carly's face in the mirror will not soften when Brennan apologizes, because apologies are for accidents and this was a choice, and yet inside the storm, there is also an education. Jocelyn, seeing the length her mother will go, understanding the cost of secrecy, will emerge sharper, less dazzled by the promise of purpose handed down from a stranger in a suit. Jason, who measures love in the currency of danger absorbed, will understand that sometimes the only way to protect someone you love is to step back and let them lead a battle they were born ready to fight. And Valentine, tasting for once the clean rush of a cause that intersects with something he can name without shame, might discover that the most efficient use of his darkness is to extinguish a greater shade. It will not be neat, nothing in this town ever is. There will be feints that fail and plans that need to be burned mid-flight. There may be a night when Carly has to choose between letting Brennan hang himself with the rope he braided and cutting the line to save an innocent pulled along behind him. There may be a dawn when Valentine's proximity to the truth draws a sniper's patience. There may be a message on Joss's secure phone that sounds like a summons but smells like bait, and through each pivot the same principle will hold. The alliance exists not because Carly forgives Valentine, not because Valentine admires Carly, but because Brennan underestimated the chemistry of two elements he believed would never combine. And so the piece moves toward its next beat, Carly's performance of calm in a house that Brennan thinks he still occupies, the quiet transfer of a case file from an office no one visits to a desk where it will be read, the courtroom appearance where a new name passes inspection and a guard stamps a visitor badge that might as well be a key. The meeting where a Cassadine and a Corinthos adjacent force map pressure points on a napkin and then turn them into action items, and when the strike lands. It will not look like vengeance at first, it will look like gravity, like a sudden acceleration of consequences that were always waiting but could never find the correct vector, and by the time Brennan recognizes the pattern, it will be too late to reverse it, because the woman he thought he could pacify with charm has already converted her fury into architecture. And the man he thought he had caged has learned to pick locks with silence. There is no going back from revelations of this magnitude. The moment Carly saw the board clearly, the endgame began, and if Brennan has spent his career betting that mothers can be placated and Cassadines kept isolated, he is about to learn the simplest lesson Port Charles teaches its most arrogant sons: when you endanger a daughter, you do not fight one person, you fight the entire constellation of her life. And if that constellation decides to align, your night is over.